famine in Boston was not a total shock. There was a foreboding sense of hunger and sickness in the year 1845 forward. There were certainly efforts by Thomas D'Arcy McGee, who came to Boston in 1846 with respect to the Young Ireland movement and stayed here, edited the Pilot, of course, before moving on, as we know, to Canada after that in his later career. The Young Ireland movement had a presence, but it was also a question of charity early on being provided for conditions in Ireland when ships were coming in with letters and the sense that something had gone wrong, because people in Boston knew from the earlier, smaller populations of the Irish coming to Boston that there had been famines in Ireland. This was not the first famine, the first major loss of food by a blight, but there are other issues before that in terms of fever and loss of life, going back to the 1700s, the 1800s. Boston had a very small Irish population in 1845, but it certainly grew in the years to come, as we certainly know. As my dear friend and mentor, Tom O'Connor, taught us at Boston College, if in 1847 you were Irish and Catholic, and particularly an Irish speaker, and there were a computer at that time, one of the places most of all you should not have gone to, had you known in advance, was probably Boston. No place was more Protestant, more hostile to Catholicism, and certainly if you were a Gaelic speaker or someone speaking a foreign language, to bring that along the way, and particularly poor, as most of the Irish coming off the ships in 1847 were older as well, sickly, people with large numbers of children. It wasn't just the strong, burly men that were being recruited in the years before that, because there was a knowledge of Irish workers being important on the docks and other work they could do. This was a large population, homeless in many ways. If you look at accounts of what's happening in Harrison Avenue, these are areas that were swampy, where there were conditions of typhus and cholera that did lead to the quarantine of Deer Island. I mean, the Irish were quarantined on the same level as Grosse Ile in Canada. So you had over 2,000 people at one stage in Deer Island, just off Boston Harbor and the Harbor Islands, and there were over 1,000 graves there from people who died there. The city fathers, it's a question that is open for honest discussion, is much driven by panic and fear, but certainly there is an anti-Irish bias in some of the attitude of getting the Irish out of the way. Over the years, with the sheer force of numbers, the Irish impact in Boston grew exponentially. If someone could have told any person suffering conditions of not having assistance in Boston who was an Irish native speaker in 1847 that in 4 generations there would be someone of their kin who would be President of the United States, I don't think they would have gone down very much as being a likely proposition. But that is what happened over time. But if you look at the impact of that Irish exodus, when you talk about the famine affecting other parts of the world, looking at the global study of the famine in many ways is a global event because of its impact. Obviously New York in somewhat larger numbers proportionally, but in terms of Boston, it transforms the city economically, culturally, politically, socially, and also in the world of sports for the years to come. It was not simply a port of call of entry. In New York, certainly, people move forward more rapidly out of New York to other places, but in the context of Boston, Massachusetts, and this region, those larger numbers are staying in this area. But if there was any one place where the Irish language was spoken among the immigrants coming from the famine, it was this city. So what was Ireland's loss was certainly a gain in terms of contribution to American society on all those levels, socially, economically, politically. It does lead, of course, to the creation of Boston College. These things drive it because of the need for education, for access that was denied by the conditions, the realities of politics and society in Boston in 1847 and the years after that. It was a time of struggle. It was social upheaval in Ireland, but it also caused upheaval in the body politic of Boston. There are some certain lessons to be learned from the standpoint of history of coming to a country being unaccepted because of who you were, no knowledge of your culture, of what you brought to the table, because you were poor, assumed that you would be a drain in society, and certainly the charitable Irish Society being founded around that time. In fact, in years before that, Irish aid societies existing were important as gestures of providing care and sustenance. But what that led to in later times in terms of activism not just among the clergy, but the Pilot is a newspaper that was very much in vogue when John Boyle O'Reilly's time came to edit the paper in strident opposition to slavery. That set a marker for the Irish contribution overall. But in this day that we're in terms of the work done by the Irish Immigration Center, the Irish Pastoral Center, these are organizations with a good knowledge of the roots of the Irish, but working today with other immigrants. Those learnings, I think, behoove the Irish experience very well in terms of joining America, being part of America, sharing the cultural experience, and helping those that are now those who are unfortunate, down on the luck, so to speak, that need a helping hand. Those organizations are proudly doing that. But there are learnings in the present day for the Irish who are here for many years, as well as remembering those admonitions from Tom O'Connor. If there was a place that you might not have gone to in 1847, Boston was not one of those. It was a foreboding place to go. But we came, we stayed, and we made more than a go of it. But that contribution to open that door to other immigrants and their contribution of the talents and skills they bring and energies to this society are important for us to be part of the bridge for making that happen.